The dim light of a single bulb flickered overhead, casting long shadows across the cramped kitchen of the old Victorian house on Elmwood Lane. It was just past midnight, and the air hung heavy with the scent of stale coffee and lingering grease from the evening's meal. Emily Harper, barely 20, sat huddled on the cold tile floor, her apron twisted in her fists. Tears streamed down her cheeks, silent at first, then breaking into soft, choked sobs that echoed off the empty walls. Her hands trembled as she clutched a small, leather-bound diary to her chest, its pages worn and yellowed. Bruises, faint shadows of aggression, marred her arms, hidden hastily under long sleeves, but visible now in her vulnerability. She had fled to this room after another long shift, the weight of unspoken burdens pressing down like the humid summer night outside. The house belonged to the Hargrove family, wealthy heirs to a logging empire that had carved its way through the northern forests decades ago. Emily had come here as a live-in maid 2 years prior, drawn by the promise of steady work and a roof over her head. But the nights like this one blurred into a haze of exhaustion and quiet despair. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, whispering to herself, "It has to stop." But how? The diary slipped slightly, revealing a faded photograph tucked between the pages, a snapshot of a younger girl, laughing beside a boy on a motorcycle, wind whipping through their hair under a vast, open sky. Outside, the rumble of a lone engine cut through the stillness, growing louder as it approached the winding driveway. Ethan Caldwell, 25 and weathered beyond his years, eased his vintage Harley to a stop at the gate. He wasn't supposed to be here. This was just a detour on his way back from a late-night ride with his crew. The Iron Vows, a tight-knit group of bikers who called the dusty roads of Willow Creek home. Ethan's leather jacket, patched with the emblem of a forged iron ring, creaked as he dismounted. His face, scarred faintly from a long-ago accident, bore the lines of someone who had stared down loss and kept riding. He had pulled up to check on a tip from an old contact. Rumors of trouble at the Hargrove estate, whispers of a girl in need. The gate creaked open under his push, and he walked the gravel path, boots crunching softly. A side door to the kitchen stood ajar, spilling a sliver of light onto the porch. Ethan's instincts, honed from years on the road, prickled. He paused, hand hovering near the doorframe, then stepped inside. The sight hit him like a sudden rain. Emily on the floor, diary in lap, her body curled as if shielding a fragile secret. She startled, eyes wide with fear, scrambling back against the cabinets. Who are you?" she stammered, voice barely above a whisper. Ethan raised his hands slowly, palms out, his voice low and steady like the hum of an idling engine. "Easy. Name's Ethan, I heard. Well, let's just say I was passing by and saw the door open. You all right?" He didn't move closer, respecting the invisible wall of her terror. The kitchen felt smaller now, the air thick with the metallic tang of fear sweat, and the faint aroma of chamomile tea gone cold on the counter. Emily's gaze darted to the diary, then back to him, weighing trust against desperation. She hesitated, then slid the book toward him across the floor, her fingers lingering on the cover. "I don't know anymore," she murmured. "It's all in there. If you read it, maybe you'll understand why I can't leave." Ethan's brow furrowed, but he knelt slowly, picking up the diary with care. The leather was soft, imprinted with faint initials, E.H. He flipped it open to a marked page. The words jumping out under the harsh light, promises of protection from a childhood friend, vows exchanged under starlit skies, now shattered by the shadows of the Hargrove household. A name caught his eye, his own from years ago, a forgotten oath made to a girl he once knew as a neighbor's kid before life pulled them apart. As he read, the pieces clicked. Emily, the wide-eyed girl from his hometown runs, now trapped in this gilded cage. The diary spoke of subtle cruelties, the endless demands, the isolation, the veiled threats that kept her bound. But woven through it was a deeper thread, a family secret, a promise Ethan had made to her late father, a fellow veteran, to watch over her if things went south. He had buried that vow under layers of his own regrets, the bike crash that took his brother's life, the years of wandering to outrun the guilt. Closing the book gently, Ethan met her eyes. "This changes everything," he said, voice rough with resolve. "I'm not leaving you here. Not tonight." Emily's sobs quieted, replaced by a tentative hope flickering in her gaze. Outside, the first hints of dawn painted the sky in soft greys, and Ethan stood offering his hand. But as they moved toward the door, a shadow shifted in the hallway beyond, the heavy tread of footsteps approaching. The Hargroves weren't the type to let go easily. Their empire was built on control, and Emily was just another thread in their web. Ethan's mind raced, the weight of that old promise igniting like the spark of his engine. He had ridden alone for too long. Now it was time to call in the vows. The kitchen clock ticked onward, marking the fragile seconds before the storm. Ethan pocketed the diary, his free hand brushing the keys in his jacket. "Hold on," he whispered. "We're getting you out." But the footsteps grew louder, and in that moment, Ethan knew this ride would test every scar, every secret, pulling him back into a fight he thought he'd left behind. The air hummed with unspoken loyalty, the kind that bound souls across forgotten years, ready to roar to life. As the door to the hallway creaked open, revealing a stern figure in a silk robe, Mr. Hargrove himself, eyes narrowing at the intruder, Ethan stepped forward, shielding Emily. The confrontation hung in the air, thick as exhaust fumes, promising a dawn ride that would echo through the valleys. For in the quiet vows of the Iron Vows, honor wasn't given, it was reclaimed, one twist of the throttle at a time. Word count, 872. The silk robe rustled like dry leaves underfoot as Mr. Hargrove stepped into the kitchen's harsh glow, his face a mask of controlled fury etched by years of boardroom battles. At 58, Victor Hargrove carried the weight of his logging empire in the breadth of his shoulders and the cold steel in his eyes, eyes that now fixed on Ethan with the precision of a predator spotting an unwelcome shadow. The air thickened, carrying the faint scent of expensive cologne mingled with the kitchen's lingering grease, turning the small space into a pressure cooker ready to blow. Emily shrank back behind Ethan, her breath hitching like a stalled engine, fingers digging into his jacket as if it were the only anchor in a swelling tide. "Who the hell are you?" Hargrove's voice sliced through the tension, low and authoritative, the kind honed from commanding crews in the wild northern woods. He glanced at Emily, his gaze sharpening like a blade on whetstone. "And what are you doing with my staff at this hour? Emily, explain yourself." Ethan didn't flinch, his stance solid as the oak trees his old man once felled. The diary burned a hole in his pocket, its words replaying in his mind. Promises to her father, Jack Harper, a vet who'd shared campfires with Ethan's own during those endless patrols overseas. Jack's last letter, scrawled in a hospital bed before the end, had begged Ethan to look after his girl if the world turned sour. Ethan had filed it away with his regrets, buried under the roar of engines and the dust of forgotten roads. But now, here it was, staring him down in the flesh. He met Hargrove's stare evenly, voice steady as gravel under tires. "Name's Ethan Caldwell, and I'm here because she needs out. Tonight." Hargrove's laugh was a bark, short and devoid of humor, echoing off the tiled walls. He took a step closer, the floorboards creaking under his polished loafers, revealing the glint of a gold watch on his wrist, a trophy from deals that had stripped forests bare. "Out? This is her home. She signed on for the long haul, room, board, Loyalty. You think you can just waltz in on a motorcycle and play hero? His eyes flicked to Emily, a flicker of possession in them, like she was another asset on his ledger. Girl's got debts, family debts. Her father's mess left her here, and I've been generous. Emily's whisper cut through, fragile but fierce, her face pale under the bulb's unforgiving light. It's not generosity, Mr. Hargrove. It's chains. She clutched Ethan's arm tighter, the bruises on her skin a silent testament, shadows of control that the diary had laid bare in ink. The words there spoke of late nights scrubbing floors while the family slept, of whispers that kept her isolated, of a favor to her late father that now bound her like vines choking a young sapling. Ethan's jaw tightened. He'd seen this before, in the hollow eyes of folks crushed under the weight of the powerful back in Willow Creek, where mills closed and promises broke. The standoff stretched, the kitchen clock's tick, amplifying into a heartbeat in the silence. Outside, the first birds stirred, their calls piercing the pre-dawn hush, but inside, the air hummed with the potential for explosion. Ethan could feel the pull of the road calling him to bolt, to scoop Emily up and vanish into the mist-shrouded valleys. But honor, the iron kind, forged in the fires of loss, held him rooted. He thought of his brother, gone in that crash 5 years back, the skid marks on a rain-slick highway, a scar that mirrored the one on his cheek. Running then had only deepened the void. Facing it now for someone else's sake felt like the first real turn of the wheel toward redemption. "You don't scare me," Ethan said, stepping just enough to block Hargrove's path to Emily. "I've ridden through worse storms than you. And that diary, it tells a different story, one about a promise I aim to keep." He didn't pull it out. No need to fan the flames yet. Hargrove's face darkened, veins pulsing at his temple like cracks in old bark. He reached for the phone on the wall, fingers hovering over the receiver, the threat implicit. Calls to local law, men on his payroll who turn a blind eye to the Empire's shadows. Emily's voice broke the spell, trembling but rising. "Please, Mr. Hargrove, I can't do this anymore. The work, the way you watch, it's not right." Her words hung, evoking the diary's confessions. Nights of fear when the house's silence turned oppressive, the subtle aggressions that wore her down like erosion on stone. Hargrove paused, the receiver untouched, his expression shifting from rage to calculation. "You leave. And what? Starve on the streets? Your father's name meant nothing without my help." Ethan's hand instinctively went to his belt, where a small chain dangled, a relic from his iron vows patch, symbol of oaths sworn among brothers who chose family over blood. "She won't starve, not on my watch." The words ignited something in him, a spark that spread warmth through the chill. He pulled out his phone, thumbing a quick message to the crew. "Trouble at Hargrove's. Need backup. Ride now." The vows weren't outlaws. They were guardians of the forgotten, ex-soldiers and wanderers, bound by a code that echoed the old logging oaths: stand together or fall alone. Hargrove sneered, but uncertainty crept into his posture, the robe slipping slightly to reveal a paunch softened by years of excess. "You and your biker delusions? This estate's private property. Get out, or I'll have you removed." He advanced, but Ethan held ground, the space between them crackling like static before a storm. Emily edged toward the door, her apron discarded on the floor like shed skin, eyes locked on Ethan with a trust blooming fragile as morning dew. In that suspended moment, the distant growl of engines answered Ethan's call, faint at first, then building like thunder rolling in from the hills. Hargrove froze, head tilting toward the window where headlights pierced the gloom, a convoy of shadows materializing on the driveway. The iron vows, 20 strong, leathers gleaming under the emerging light, engines purring with restrained power. They weren't here for war, but for witness, the kind that exposed truths in the light of day. "You called your pack?" Hargrove spat, backing a step, the cologne now cloying in the confined air. Ethan nodded, a grim smile tugging his lips. Family shows up when it matters. Emily's hand found his, cool and steadying as the first biker dismounted outside, boots hitting gravel with purpose. The dawn broke fully now, painting the kitchen in golden hues that chased the shadows, illuminating the path ahead. But Hargrove wasn't done. His mind whirred, plotting counters in the Empire's vast web. As the door burst open with the arrival of Ethan's brothers, the real ride began. Not just engines thundering, but the reclamation of a soul bound by forgotten vows. Ethan glanced at Emily, her face alight with the first real hope in years, and knew this dawn marked the start of a journey where loyalty would carve through corruption like a blade through fog. The air vibrated with the promise of justice, silent and unyielding, as the vows formed a living shield around the girl who'd cried alone for too long. The gravel crunched like brittle bones under the boots of the iron vows as they fanned out across the Hargrove driveway, their silhouettes cutting sharp against the rising sun. Engines idled low, a symphony of restrained thunder that vibrated through the ground, sending faint tremors into the kitchen where Ethan stood firm. The air outside carried the crisp bite of morning dew mixed with the acrid tang of exhaust, a scent that always grounded Ethan, reminding him of endless horizons and the freedom of the open road. Inside, Victor Hargrove's face twisted, the golden light spilling through the window etching harsh lines across his features, turning his silk robe into a mockery of faded royalty. Ethan felt Emily's grip tighten on his arm, her pulse racing like a small engine revving against fear. The diary in his pocket felt heavier now, its pages a map of buried truths. Jack Harper's final plea, scrawled in shaky script after the war, had claimed too much. Watch over Em if I'm gone. She's got fire, but the world's got wolves. Ethan had dismissed it back then. Lost in his own wreckage, the skid marks from his brother's fatal crash still fresh in his nightmares. But reading Emily's words last night had unearthed it all, the guilt twisting like handlebars in white-knuckled hands. He couldn't run this time. The vows were here, brothers forged in the same fires of loss, ready to honor what blood couldn't. From the doorway, Marcus Hale, the vows' grizzled sergeant-at-arms, a vet with a limp from an old IED, stepped forward first, his broad frame blocking the porch light. At 42, Marcus carried the weight of their code like a badge, iron rings etched with oaths of protection, sworn under moonlit campfires years ago. "Ethan," he rumbled, voice like gravel shifting under tires, eyes scanning the scene with the precision of a man who'd stared down worse than a logging baron. "We got your signal. What's the play?" Behind him, the crew, 18 riders strong, leathers patched with the vow emblem, formed a loose perimeter. Not aggressive, but unyielding, their presence a wall of quiet resolve against the estate's manicured facade. Hargrove whirled toward the window, his composure cracking like thin ice under boot. "This is trespassing," he snarled, jabbing a finger at the glass. "I'll have the sheriff here in minutes. My people. You bikers think you can intimidate me? I've buried bigger threats than you in these woods." His voice rose, echoing off the high ceilings, but there was a tremor beneath it. The uncertainty of a man whose power relied on isolation, not confrontation. Emily flinched at the word buried, her mind flashing to the diary's darker entries. Whispers of her father's accident in the mill, a fall that Hargrove's ledgers had quietly swept away, binding her in silent debt. Ethan stepped between her and the window, his scarred cheek catching the light, a reminder of the night he'd lost control on a rain-slick curve, his brother's screams fading into the rear view. "No one's here for trouble," he said, addressing Hargrove, but locking eyes with Marcus through the glass. "Just truth. Emily's leaving. Her choice. And if that means riding through whatever you've got waiting, so be it." The words hung heavy, laced with the moral weight of redemption, the kind that demanded facing the shadows you'd let fester. He'd promised Jack more than watchfulness. It was guardianship, the unspoken vow of soldiers who knew betrayal's sting all too well. Outside, the crew shifted, helmets glinting like polished shields. Lena Torres, the only woman in the core vows, a former nurse with tattoos mapping her own scars from emergency rooms turned war zones, dismounted gracefully, her bike's kickstand sinking into the soft earth. She caught Emily's gaze through the pane, offering a nod that spoke volumes. "You're not alone anymore." The gesture stirred something in Emily, a spark amid the ashes of her isolation. For 2 years, the Hargrove house had been a cage of polished surfaces and hidden barbs, endless chores that left her bones aching, watchful eyes that turned every corner into a trap. The diary had been her confessor, pages filled with pleas to a past self, to the girl who dreamed of escape on the back of a bike, like the one in that faded photo. Hargrove lunged for the phone again, but Ethan was faster, his hand clamping over the receiver with a gentleness that belied his strength. "Call them," he challenged, voice low. The kitchen steam from a forgotten kettle curling around them like fog on a mountain pass. "But know this, we've got witnesses. Folks who'll talk about the girl you kept like a secret in your attic. Her father's name? It meant something once, means more now." The Baron's eyes widened fractionally, the bluff hitting home, the Empire's underbelly, whispers of unpaid debts and silenced voices in the logging towns, now threatened by this ragtag family of riders. Emily found her voice then, stepping forward with a resolve that surprised even her, the morning light haloing her tear-streaked face. "I'm done, Mr. Hargrove. The work, the watching, it ends here. You can't hold me with guilt forever." Her words carried the poetic justice of the dawn, a quiet rebellion against the corruption that had cloaked her days in grey. Hargrove recoiled, the phone slipping from his grasp, clattering to the tile like a dropped gauntlet. For a heartbeat the room held its breath, the distant hum of the Vow's engines underscoring the shift, like the world tilting toward balance. Marcus pushed the door wider, the creak amplifying the moment, fresh air rushing in with the scent of pine and possibility. "Time to go, Ethan," he said, extending a hand to Emily. She took it, her steps tentative at first, then surer, leaving the apron and the shadows behind. Hargrove watched, impotent rage simmering, but the convoy's presence was a tide he couldn't stem. As they emerged into the light, the crew encircled them, a living chain of loyalty, ex-loggers, mechanics, wanderers united not by blood, but by the iron promise to stand for the overlooked. Ethan mounted his Harley, Emily settling behind him, her arms wrapping around his waist with a trust that mended old fractures. The engine roared to life beneath them, a beast awakening, vibrating through his core like the pulse of reclaimed honor. But as they peeled out, Hargrove's shout followed. "This isn't over. You'll regret crossing me." The threat lingered, a shadow on the horizon, hinting at pursuits through the winding valleys, where corruption's roots ran deep. Ethan glanced back once, the estate shrinking in the mirrors, then gunned the throttle. The road ahead stretched infinite, carrying them toward Willow Creek and the Vow's hidden safe house, a weathered barn turned sanctuary where secrets could breathe and plans could form. In the rear view, the crew fell in line, a thunderous escort against the awakening world. Emily's cheek pressed to his back, her whisper lost to the wind, but felt in the warmth. "Thank you." And it was the first thread of redemption, weaving through the scars, promising that some vows, though buried, could rise with the sun. Yet Ethan knew the ride was far from over. Hargrove's web extended beyond these gates, into towns where justice bent to power. The moral storm brewed, ethical tempests waiting in the turns ahead, testing the bonds of chosen family against the gales of betrayal. For now, though, The highway sang, a ballad of quiet courage, engines harmonizing with the heartbeat of honor reborn. The wind whipped through the valleys like a relentless whisper from the past, carrying the faint echo of pine sap and sun-warmed asphalt as Ethan's Harley led the convoy toward Willow Creek. Emily clung to his back, her body still tense against the vibration of the engine, the leather of his jacket a barrier against the chill that seeped from her bones. The road curved like a serpent through mist-shrouded hills, the iron vows fanning out in a protective wedge, Marcus at the flank, Lena scouting ahead on her sleek black cruiser. The dawn had fully broken now, painting the sky in strokes of amber and rose, but the light did little to dispel the shadows trailing them. Hargrove's parting threat lingered in Ethan's mind, a low rumble beneath the roar of pipes. They pulled into the safe house just as the sun crested the ridge, a weathered barn on the outskirts of Willow Creek, its red paint faded to a rustic patina under years of northern rains. The structure stood sentinel amid a scatter of wild oaks, the air thick with the earthy scent of damp soil and hay bales stacked against one wall. Engines cut off one by one, the sudden silence amplifying the creak of cooling metal and the distant call of a crow. Ethan dismounted first, offering Emily a steadying hand, her legs wobbling like a fawn's on uneven ground. Her eyes, red-rimmed from the night's tears, scanned the surroundings, the cluster of bikes forming a makeshift corral, the crew dismounting with the quiet efficiency of old hands. "Welcome to the Vows Den," Marcus said, his voice gravelly as he clapped Ethan on the shoulder, the limp in his step barely noticeable on the familiar terrain. At his side, Lena nodded to Emily, her tattooed arms crossed, the ink of intertwined rings mirroring the patches on their jackets. The barn's double doors swung open with a groan, revealing an interior lit by shafts of sunlight filtering through cracked boards. A communal space with worn couches, a long oak table scarred from countless strategy sessions, and a pot of coffee brewing on a hot plate, its rich aroma cutting through the musty air. This was no fortress, but a sanctuary woven from loyalty, where ex-soldiers and road-weary souls gathered to mend what the world had torn. Emily hesitated at the threshold, the diary still tucked in Ethan's pocket like a talisman, its weight a reminder of confessions spilled in the kitchen's dim light. I've never seen anything like this," she murmured, her voice soft against the barn's echoing vastness. The crew gave her space, respecting the fragility of her escape. Jake, a lanky mechanic with grease-stained fingers, busied himself with the bikes, while others unpacked saddlebags, the clink of tools, a rhythmic underscore to the morning's calm. Ethan guided her to a chair by the table, pouring her a mug of coffee, steam rising like morning fog. "It's home for us," he said, settling across from her, his scarred face softened in the warm glow. "Not by birth, but by choice, like the promise I made to your dad." The words hung between them, pulling at threads of memory. Emily's fingers traced the mug's rim, her gaze distant, evoking the diary's pages. Childhood summers in Willow Creek, where Jack Harper and Ethan's father had shared stories around flickering campfires, forging bonds that war had tested but not broken. Jack's final days, bedridden in a veterans ward, had been marked by quiet regrets, debts to the logging trade that Hargrove's empire had exploited, leaving Emily as unwitting collateral. "He talked about you once," she said, voice gaining strength. "Said you were the one who'd ride through fire for family. I thought it was just stories." Ethan's throat tightened. The crash that took his brother had buried those ideals under guilt, turning him into a lone rider until the vows pulled him back. Reading her diary had been like striking flint, igniting the vow he'd let rust. Marcus joined them, sliding a worn map across the table, its edges frayed like old oaths. "Hargrove's not the type to let go quiet," he warned, tapping a spot marked as the estate. "His reach goes deep, local folks on the take, whispers in the mills. We need to know what's in that book. Full story." Lena leaned in, her nurse's instincts sharp, offering Emily a blanket against the barn's draft. The group formed a loose circle, the air humming with unspoken solidarity, the scent of coffee mingling with the faint leather polish from their gear. Emily nodded, drawing a breath, and as Ethan retrieved the diary, she began recounting the shadows, the isolation of the Hargrove house, where grand halls hid subtle aggressions, endless demands that chipped at her spirit, veiled warnings that echoed her father's unresolved ties to the family business. "He fell in the mill," she said, eyes downcast. "They called it an accident, but the ledgers. They hid it, said I'd work it off." The words stirred the crew, faces hardening with the moral fire of those who'd seen corruption twist justice. Jake muttered about rigged inspections in the logging towns, while Lena spoke of patients silenced by fear. Ethan flipped through the pages, the faded photo slipping out, the one of young Emily on a bike, wind in her hair, a boy, him years younger, grinning beside her. It was a snapshot of innocence, before loss carved its lines. "This ends now," Ethan declared, voice steady as the barn's timbers. "We expose it, quietly by the book. No guns, just truth. The vows stand for that." The plan took shape, contacts in town, a lawyer from the old guard who'd owed Jack a favor, paths to unravel Hargrove's web without descending into the Baron's level of control. But as the sun climbed higher, casting golden pools across the floor, a distant engine growl pierced the peace. Not the vows, but something sleeker, authoritative. Through the barn's slatted window, headlights flashed on the access road, two black sedans kicking up dust, bearing the insignia of Hargrove's private security. The air shifted, tension coiling like a spring, the coffee's warmth forgotten. Marcus rose, hand on his belt, not for a weapon, but a phone to record. "They're here," Lena whispered, positioning herself by Emily. Ethan's pulse quickened, the diary clutched tight. This was the ethical crossroads, where loyalty clashed with the law's corrupted arm. He stepped to the door, the crew flanking him, their presence a shield of chosen kin. The sedans halted, doors opening to reveal suited figures, hard-eyed men with badges that gleamed falsely in the light. "Mr. Caldwell," the lead called, voice amplified by the valley's echo. "We need to talk about the girl. Return her or face obstruction charges." Hargrove's ploy: twist the escape into theft, leveraging influence to drag them into his arena. Emily stood behind Ethan, her resolve flickering but holding, the barn's shadows deepening as clouds scudded overhead. In that moment, the weight of redemption pressed full, Ethan's past scars, Jack's unspoken plea, the vow's iron bond, all converging on a stand that could shatter or forge anew. The lead man advanced, papers in hand, the rustle like dry leaves in a gathering storm. Ethan met his gaze, the road's freedom now a battleground for honor. "She's free to choose," he replied, the words of vow renewed, vibrating with the quiet power of souls aligned against the tide. The confrontation brewed, ethical lines blurring in the midday haze, promising a ride through moral tempests where truth would throttle forward, unyielding as the engines that bound them. If this tale of reclaimed promises is stirring something in you, take a moment to hit that like button below. It helps these stories of quiet courage reach more hearts in need. The midday sun hung heavy over the Willow Creek safe house, its rays slicing through the barn's slatted walls like searchlights probing for weakness. Dust motes danced in the beams, disturbed by the sudden hush that fell as the lead security man, tall, broad-shouldered, with a badge pinned to his crisp shirt like a false talisman, stepped forward from the sedan. His companions flanked him, hands resting casually near their belts. The air between them and the vows, thickening with the scent of polished leather and impending rain from the gathering clouds overhead. The engines of the intruders' vehicles ticked as they cooled, a mechanical sigh underscoring the standoff, while the iron vows held their ground, a circle of weathered faces etched with the quiet defiance of those who'd faced down worse horizons. Ethan stood at the barn's threshold, the diary's edges pressing into his palm like a heartbeat, its confessions fueling the resolve that straightened his spine. Emily hovered just behind him, her breath shallow against his shoulder, the blanket Lena had draped around her slipping slightly in the rising wind. The crew's presence was a living barrier, Marcus to his left, eyes narrowed under the brim of his faded cap, Lena to his right, her stance poised like a coiled spring, ready to shield without striking. This wasn't about fists or fury, it was the slow burn of moral reckoning where words could carve deeper than any blade, exposing the rot beneath Hargrove's empire. "Free to choose," the lead man echoed, his voice carrying the oily smoothness of rehearsed authority, papers fluttering in his grip like captured flags. He glanced at Emily, his gaze lingering a beat too long, assessing her as property rather than person. Miss Harper's under contract, family obligations, Mr. Hargrove's concerned for her well-being, reports of coercion, undue influence from outsiders. The lie hung in the air, sharp as the tang of exhaust from the sedans, twisting the truth to fit the Baron's narrative. Behind him, one of the guards shifted, boots scuffing the gravel, a subtle reminder of the power plays that kept Willow Creek's underbelly in check, mills that ground down workers, debts that chained families like invisible irons. Emily's fingers dug into Ethan's jacket, but her voice emerged clearer now, tempered by the barn's sanctuary and the vow's unyielding support. "It's not coercion," she said, stepping partially into the light, her chin lifting against the breeze that tugged at her hair. "It's freedom. For the first time." The words carried the weight of her diary's revelations. The subtle aggressions in the Hargrove halls, the isolation that had muffled her cries, the debts that masked a deeper hold, rooted in her father's unresolved ties to the logging trade. Jack Harper's fall hadn't been chance. Whispers in the pages hinted at overlooked safety lapses, covered by Hargrove's influence, leaving Emily as the silent payment. The lead man's smirk faltered, the papers crinkling as he thrust them forward. "Sign this release, or we take her in for her own protection. Obstruction's a serious charge, could ground your little club for good." He eyed the bikes, their chrome glinting defiantly, as if calculating the cost of towing them away. Marcus let out a low chuckle, the sound rumbling like distant thunder, his limp forgotten in the surge of protective instinct. Protection? That's rich, coming from Hargrove's lapdogs. We've seen your kind, turning blind eyes for a paycheck, while folks like her father get buried in accidents. His words struck true, evoking the ethical quagmire of the northern towns. Authorities swayed by logging fortunes, justice bent like timber under pressure. Ethan didn't take the papers. Instead, he pulled the diary from his pocket, holding it aloft like a banner in the wind-whipped yard. The leather cover caught the sun, its initials, E.H., gleaming faintly, a testament to truths etched in ink rather than ledgers. "Read this," he said, voice steady as the oak roots anchoring the barn. "It's all here. The promises broken, the shadows you helped hide. Jack Harper was a good man, served his country, then got chewed up by your boss's machine. I swore to him I'd watch over his girl. That's no crime. That's honor." The crew murmured agreement, Jake wiping his hands on a rag, his mechanic's eyes sharp with the memory of mill workers he'd patched up after mishaps. Lena stepped closer to Emily, her hand gentle on the young woman's elbow, a silent vow of sisterhood among the scars. The lead guard hesitated, the wind carrying the faint scent of approaching rain, heavy and electric, mirroring the storm of conscience brewing in his stance. His companions exchanged glances, the weight of the moment pressing. The vows weren't armed, but their unity was a force, witnesses to a narrative Hargrove couldn't silence with bribes. "This isn't your fight," the man tried. But his tone wavered, the badge suddenly feeling like a chain rather than a shield. Emily's story, pieced from the diary, rippled outward. Not just her isolation, but a pattern of quiet control in the empire. Workers bound by fear, families fractured by unspoken pacts. It was the poetic justice Ethan had sensed at dawn, truth emerging like sunlight through fog, demanding accountability without a drop of blood. In the suspended beat, a new rumble joined the fray, not threat, but reinforcement. From the ridge road, 2 more bikes crested, riders from the Vow's outer circle. An ex-firefighter named Ryan, his frame solid as the trucks he'd once commanded, and Sarah, a sharp-eyed veteran with a knack for records, her saddlebag bulging with files from town hall whispers. They pulled up smoothly, engines cutting to join the circle, doubling the presence without a word. Ryan nodded to Ethan, the gesture laden with the chosen family's code. Show up, stand firm, let loyalty speak. Sarah dismounted, pulling a slim folder from her bag, her voice cutting clear. We've got copies of the old mill reports. Irregularities, dates that match the diary. Hargrove's not as clean as he thinks. The lead man's face paled, the papers drooping in his hand as the clouds overhead darkened, first fat drops pattering on the barn's roof like hesitant applause. He crumpled the documents, shoving them back into his jacket, the bluff exposed in the light of collective truth. This changes things, he muttered, backing toward the sedan, his team following suit. No arrests, no drags, just retreat, the moral tide turning without force. As the vehicles reversed, gravel spraying in defeat, the Vows exhaled as one, the rain now steady, washing the dust from the yard in silvery sheets. Inside the barn, Emily sank into a chair, the blanket soaking lightly, but her eyes shone with a newfound clarity, the redemption of voices heard, promises fulfilled. Ethan knelt beside her, the diary open between them, pages fluttering in the draft from the door. It's not over, he said softly, the scent of wet earth mingling with coffee's warmth. But we've got the road ahead, together. Marcus clapped his shoulder, Lena brewing fresh mugs. The crew, settling into planning, calls to that old lawyer, paths to formal channels that bypassed corruption. The rain drummed a rhythm of renewal, echoing the heartbeat of honor reclaimed, as the safe house became more than shelter, a forge for justice, where chosen kin turned whispers into thunder. Yet in the quiet aftermath, Ethan felt the pull of deeper scars, his brother's ghost in every rain-slick memory, Jack's plea a bridge to healing. Emily's hand found his, tentative but sure, the bond weaving through the storm. Outside, the valley greened under the downpour, promising that some rides led not to escape, but to standing ground, where loyalty's iron held against the gale. The confrontation had passed, but Hargrove's shadow loomed, ethical currents swirling toward a final reckoning, one that would test the Vow's core, carving redemption from the raw edges of truth. The rain fell in relentless sheets over Willow Creek, turning the access road into a ribbon of mud that swallowed the sedan's taillights as they retreated down the ridge. Inside the barn, the steady drum on the tin roof wove a curtain of isolation, muffling the world's clamor and allowing the iron Vows to breathe in the aftermath. Steam rose from the fresh coffee mugs clustered on the oak table, its scarred surface now a war room for truths long buried. Ethan sat beside Emily, the diary open between them like a shared scar, its pages damp at the edges from the downpour, but unyielding in their testimony. The air carried the mingled sense of wet wool from blankets, bitter brew, and the faint, grounding earthiness of rain-soaked hay, grounding the group in this fragile peace. Emily's hands trembled slightly as she traced the faded photograph again, the one that had bridged their pasts, capturing a moment of unscarred youth under an endless sky. "I never thought anyone would believe it," she whispered, her voice threading through the patter outside, eyes reflecting the soft glow of a lantern Marcus had lit against the storm's gloom. The crew encircled them loosely, faces illuminated in flickering amber. Lena wiping rain from her brow, her nurse's gaze assessing Emily's pallor. Jake tinkering with a radio in the corner, static crackling like unspoken worries. Ryan and Sarah poring over the folder of mill reports, their whispers a low hum of strategy. This was the heart of the vows, chosen family, forged not in blood, but in the quiet fires of mutual redemption, where one rider's burden became the pack's oath. Ethan nodded, his scarred cheek catching the light. The old crash's echo a dull ache in his chest. Jack Harper's plea had resurfaced like a tide pulling at submerged wreckage. "Watch over her, son. The world's wolves don't forget a debt." He'd failed once, letting guilt throttle his engine after his brother's death, wandering roads that led nowhere. But here, in this barn that smelled of oil and resilience, the vow reignited, pulling him toward justice's horizon. "We believe it," he said, voice rough as gravel under tires, "and we'll make sure Hargrove faces it. No more shadows." The words hung, evoking the diary's core, not just Emily's isolation in the gilded cage of the estate, but the broader web, workers silenced in the logging mills, families fractured by accidents that Hargrove's ledgers had erased, all tied to her father's fall, a convenient slip veiled in corporate fog. Marcus leaned forward, his broad hands splaying on the map, fingers tracing routes through the valleys like veins of ore. "The lawyer, old Tom Riley, owed Jack from the war days. He'll take the case pro bono. We've got the reports, the diary, witness statements from folks in town who've been waiting to speak." His limp shadowed him as he paced, but his resolve was ironclad, born from IED-scarred nights overseas, where loyalty meant survival. Lena added softly, her tattoos shifting like living oaths. "And medical angles. Those signs of strain on you, Emily. It'll paint the picture without the gore, truth over force." The plan unfolded in measured beats. Deliver the evidence to Riley by dusk. Leverage town hall hearings to expose the irregularities. Turn Hargrove's empire against itself through the light of public scrutiny. No raids, no vengeance, just the poetic grind of moral gears turning, grinding corruption to dust. As the rain eased to a drizzle, the group mobilized, saddlebags packed with files and resolve. Emily rose, shedding the blanket like old skin, her steps surer on the barn's packed dirt floor. The wind outside carried the fresh bite of ozone, clearing the air as if washing away the night's confessions. Ethan watched her, the weight of redemption settling warm in his core. This wasn't just rescue, it was reclamation, honoring Jack by weaving Emily into the vows' tapestry. They mounted up under the greying sky, engines coughing to life in a chorus that vibrated through the bones, the convoy snaking toward town like a steel river carving through stone. The hearing convened 2 days later in Willow Creek's modest courthouse, a stone edifice weathered by northern winds, its halls echoing with the murmur of locals drawn by whispers of scandal. Sunlight slanted through tall windows, casting long beams across wooden benches packed with mill workers, veterans, and curious townsfolk, the overlooked souls Hargrove had long dismissed. Ethan sat in the back row with the vows, their leathers a stark contrast to the suits. Emily at his side, her hands clasped tight but eyes forward, the diary now in Riley's possession. The air hummed with the scent of polished oak and faint pipe smoke from the judge's chambers, tension coiling like a spring in the quiet before testimony. Riley, silver-haired and sharp as a fresh chain, presented the case with the precision of a man who'd fought beside Jack in forgotten foxholes. "This isn't about one girl," he intoned, voice resonating off the vaulted ceiling, holding up the diary like evidence of a deeper wound. "It's about a system that binds the vulnerable, debts twisted into chains, accidents into cover-ups." Emily took the stand next, her voice steady under the room's gaze, recounting the estate's subtle aggressions, the endless isolation, the watchful control that echoed her father's unresolved ties to the mills. No graphic horrors, just the erosion of spirit, the moral theft that Hargrove's empire thrived on. Gasps rippled through the crowd as Sarah followed, laying out the reports, irregular safety logs, payments to silence voices, painting a portrait of institutional rot. Hargrove entered late, flanked by lawyers in crisp pinstripes, his face a thundercloud under the courtroom's harsh fluorescence. He testified with bluster, the logging baron's baritone booming denials, but cracks showed, sweat beading on his brow, eyes darting to the diary as if it were a serpent. The judge, a no-nonsense veteran named Elias Grant, leaned forward, his gavel a silent threat. Promises made in blood and ink don't vanish, Mr. Hargrove, nor do the lives they touch. Cross-examinations peeled back layers, the accidents that mirrored Jack's fall, debts that bound families like Emily's, all substantiated by the vow's quiet legwork. No violence marred the room, only the suspense of ethical unraveling, truth throttling forward against lie's drag. By afternoon's close, the ruling came, contracts voided, investigations launched into the mills, reparations ordered for affected families. Hargrove stormed out, his empire's foundations shaken, but the real victory echoed in Emily's exhale as she left the stand, the weight lifting like fog burned by sun. Outside, the vows waited, engines idling under a clearing sky, the valley air crisp with pine and possibility. Ethan pulled her into a brief embrace, the roar of the convoy rising as they rode out. Not fleeing, but claiming the road ahead, scars mended by loyalty's forge. In the weeks that followed, Willow Creek stirred with change, mills audited, workers speaking freely, the shadow of control receding like night before dawn. Emily found her place among the vows, her hands learning the twist of a throttle, the diary a keepsake of survival. Ethan rode beside her, the old crash's ghosts quieter now, Jack's vow fulfilled in the family they'd chosen. Honor, once buried, bloomed eternal. Silent actions rippling into legacies of justice where promises outlasted storms, binding souls across the endless miles. If this journey of reclaimed vows has touched your road, we invite you to subscribe and join the ride. Your support keeps these tales of quiet honor rolling to those who need them most.